Hello everybody, welcome back to Brad's Book Club. We just finished up our reading of Genghis Khan, so I thought it would be a good idea. Before we start our next book, I'm deciding between, not that anyone's actually following, but the next book will either be Korea, A New History of South and North by Victor D. Cha and Ramon Pacheco Pardo, or Behind the Beautiful Forevers by Catherine Bu. This one seems to be about kind of like a narrative nonfiction out of India. I think this is nonfiction, but it has won the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Award, and obviously Korea is about the Korean Peninsula. So sticking with history for now, again, typically, I'd say at this point in my life, reading any sort of science or technology doesn't really do anything for me. Personal help, self-help is absolutely no. Right? And so mostly history stuff. But if another book catches my eye, I will branch onto other things. But just all of the scientific stuff, I derived that over in math class. And so before we started a new book, I just thought it would be a good idea to kind of just talk about books that I have read, books that I like. I will do an entire video on Thomas Cahill, who I would say is my favorite history writer, or writer in general, certainly as a student, because what I do with mathematics and logic, linguistics is so comprehensive. The authors just need to have a certain amount of writing maturity, as well as a topic that I'm not super well known or well versed in to learn something new. And so as a student, and again, I'm at the teaching point of stage of my life. And so all of these things that we're talking about, I've read through as a student myself. And so as a student, Thomas Cahill has a series called The Seven Hinges of History. Can't recommend it enough. I will do a whole video about that series. But I don't reread books. I'm not going to reread anything. But I have a big pile here of books that I've read or books that I've bought and haven't read, but they were interesting enough for me to pick them up, and then I'll explain why I did not read them. So by far, hands down, without a question, the Thomas Cahill Seven Hinges of History is my favorite history series of all time. And again, when I was reading as a student, I was like excited, genuinely excited to read more in those books. Other books that I've sent, because I've sent a bunch of these books out to Berkeley. Anything with my handwritten derivations in them is sent off as when it makes sense for me to. And so I've read, it's kind of funny, I did a whole video called, The Curse of Good Will Hunting. Popular movie everybody's seen, but in that movie I didn't even realize the book when Will Hunting is in there with Robin Williams and he's talking about, you got all these books, but you got the wrong ones. And he references Howard Zinn, History of America. And so I didn't even realize that was the book in the movie, but I read that one. I graded that one word for word. Herodotus's Histories, I graded that word for word. The Seven Hinges of History, and there's a couple other ones. All of the Scalia's, I really like Scalia and Gardner's writing. But again, for me to like an author, they just have to have a sophistication and maturity of their writing. Because even if you're talking about something that I don't want to say agree or disagree with, but if you're intuitively understanding of something and then you use all of the wrong words, it's still beneficial for me personally and beneficial for anyone trying to learn or to read and to grow. And so that's really what authors I like, is just a certain level of writing maturity. It doesn't even have to be the right topic, so to speak. But I did think it would be interesting. I'm trying to think of Howard Zinn, American history, a history of China. I did a whole book on China. And Southeast Asia is really, but again, I don't know if there's any history books unique to them coming out of there, because everything on the world stage I've certainly hit. But I was just in Barnes & Noble looking for Southeast Asia, and there's some ones like the Khmers out of Cambodia I certainly want to do. Vietnam I certainly want to do. The whole region I want to do, but it just, working up to trying to pick things that hit the most corners. And I thought Korea and India were a good next step. And so I'm trying to think of other books that I've read that were interesting to me as a student, or just that you'll see that I've graded literally word for word. In Leo Tolstoy, that was the biggest one I did, 1,227 pages. Literally logically graded the whole word. What is logically grading? If you ever met somebody, again, they're intuitively talking about something, and they'll describe a process, and they'll use the wrong word, and you'll know exactly what the word they're trying to say is. It's that, but I do it with a whole entire book. And so Tolstoy and Herodotus, I did the whole thing, they're big masterpiece works. And so those are huge chunks of work, but those were years and years ago. And so they're out there in the world somewhere. But regardless, I just have, 10 books here that I'll go through. Just give you some overall thoughts of, again, why I read them, why I didn't read them, so on and so forth. So the first one, again, no particular order. I have Genome by Matt Ridley, the autobiography of species in 23 characters. So I did read this one, I believe so. And I will send these off to the science team, but they're not, all of the ones that are written in are the ones that I've covered, or you'll see, but they'll all be signed. I just, again, to have what I learned before I started doing all of this derivation. Well, really begin, the reading of history and all of this stuff really came after the initial proofing. And so the genome, obviously about genetics, enough before I started doing my derivations, or as developed as I am now, had some value, because again, I had to learn everything that I'm deriving on, like literally everything as well. But once you learn and get it one time, and then I just know it. And so again, there's just not enough development. There's certainly nothing novel scientific that's kind of like new to me, I mean, in anything. But there's not enough development typically from science writers for me to have like another one, right? Here's a book that I didn't read. I'm sure you've heard of it. Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species. Because it's just like, it literally reads to me like, I got on the Beagle and I went over and looked at some birds and they had a longer tail and this one had longer fingernails. And it's like, that's great, that's observations, that's fantastically true. Is there enough analysis? Is there logic to it where it's even interesting? The answer was just no. So I went all the way to buy the book, I got the book, whole $7, and then you start reading it and just like the maturity and the sophistication of the analysis or of the logic is absent. That's not to say he's a bad writer, but just biology is observant. You just say, here, this one has a blue tail, this one has an orange tail, this one has 8 legs, this thing is a mammal. And so it's like, obviously a big work of world history, not interesting enough to read. Genome, I do believe I read this. I do believe I read this. But just again, specificity to genomics, the genome was enough for me to read as a student. Charles Darwin did not make the cut. This book I really liked. I told you this story. I had an old friend, Chris Modi, and I posted this on Snapchat, and I said, you should go read this book. And he literally comments like, dude, are you okay? Because it's called The Lies Teachers Told Me. As if I was going to go like be some crazy dude. And this book is literally about like publishing textbooks, which actually I thought this was an extremely interesting one. I definitely recommend this one by James W. Lowen. And it's not some, again, ideological thing. It's just more about the practicality of writing a textbook, of getting a textbook into a school district. So the information that you get presented is way more political and not even in like what you think of politics. Just like running a business, practicality is governing what you get exposed to. But this book, I don't remember, again, I don't have anything written down specifically or highlighted within it, but I definitely like this one, definitely read the whole thing of this one, and it just, I'm not going to read the backgrounds or like the backings of them, but this book I certainly remember enjoying, by James Lowen. Moving on, this was a fun one, Significant Figures, the Lives and Works of Great Mathematicians. So I try to give a run at the old mathematics once in my day. Yeah, solved everything. But again, when you're someone who's demonstrated a completely reduced proof, it's just like interesting to see what other people think is a big jump in mathematics. And so you get your typical figures. There's some, I forget, I don't know if it has it listed. We have Archimedes, Luhui, Muhammad al-Khwarizm, Zimi, which that's interesting because we just read that over in the Genghis Khan book. In Khwarizmi, I guess, is the etymological roots with, or is the base of algorithm to some extent. We had Madhava of Sangamargrama, Girolamo Cardano, Pierre de Fermat, Isaac Newton, and the rest of them I've heard of. But the first 3 I'd not heard of whatsoever. The rest of them I've personally drove. Still don't know what to say there. But I've personally reproduced all of the structure of mathematics. People think that's a joke. It is not. And it's actually not that much information. It's a lot for you peasants out there, but people don't say that many new things. This is another one I think I started, but it just wasn't. The sophistication of the authors was not enough for me to continue. The End of Epidemics, The Looming Threat to Humanity and How to Stop It, by Jonathan D. Quick, MD. So again, all medical doctors really never get to a sophistication of writing that's interesting to me. Obviously, since I bought this book, again, this would have been in like 2017, 18. So since then, we've had a global pandemic, which is actually kind of interesting because the title's The End of Epidemics. Again, pandemic versus epidemic, but just epidemic being a local cluster, pandemic being a lot of epidemics. But the overall is true. It's just once you intersperse and interact with enough people, biology kind of like self-regulates, right? If you have a cluster of people in China that has never been seen before, and then they come out and the bubonic plague comes out, or out of Wuhan the coronavirus, it's like the more interconnected people are, biologically you're going to be less prone to disease because you interact with one another. And the same way you go play in the dirt when you're a kid and you're less likely to develop allergies. And so I began this book. I don't think I finished it, but just because there's not enough sophistication from the medical kind of writing. This one I thoroughly enjoyed. Like I said, I thought I sent this one out. But Antonin Scalia, again, I liked him as a writer. Again, I have I don't come from any of these, I just do proofing. Like I don't really have any opinions on any of this stuff. It's just, here's a fact, here's what is true, here's what is logically consistent. And so you get a lot of that type of intuition from Scalia, as well as Gardner, who is another member of the Supreme Court or a law dude. So they always seem to be dynamic duoing stuff. And so we have a foreword by the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Scalia is also dead, but I thought this was a good book. It's just reflections on law, faith, and life well lived. And I certainly like the integration of your own personal story, because again, history is all of our individual stories collectively. So I like when people talk about general stuff as well and connect it to their own personal life. So a big fan of Scalia and Gardner as writers. The Supreme Court's obviously a joke. I mean, I don't think Scalia was alive when I submitted my petition for original jurisdiction at the Supreme Court, and obviously they took my $300 for a filing fee. And do I have constitutional rights? Yep, still not. So that's fun stuff. Moving along, we had Undoctored. This one I did enjoy, read the whole thing, I think. And there's a bookmark in it, so maybe not. But basically just showing, again, the politics of medicine. People going to conferences and not really caring about, does this help somebody? And so you see the politics, right? It just says Undoctored. Why healthcare has failed you and how you can become smarter than your doctor. Well, that's not very difficult. Again, doctors don't really do new things. It's diagnostic. They have this licensure from the state, which is fraudulent at this point because scientific information is not being disseminated. And so it's basically like the cool club, but nobody knows your body better than you do. And so it's like, and then again, for me specifically, or anybody, again, the healthcare, like there's no such thing as someone, you should have to be an organ donor. If your organs are functioning and you die, you shouldn't have an option of being an organ donor or not being an organ donor. If you happen to pass away and your your meat suit is still functional, there should be no question. Like you can't not be an organ donor. That's not really the purpose of this book, but it just shows you again the political or the practical structure of healthcare, which is atrocious. I mean, that's probably the single biggest disgrace. Well, I mean, the society in its whole is a disgrace at this point. But in the United States of America, healthcare, if you have a happy and healthy populace, everyone gets richer. That is just objectively true. And so certainly a country that should have healthcare shouldn't be a thought in anybody's head. Obviously it is. And you can go read a book. Someone's making money. A doctor is writing a book about other doctors not doctoring. So it's almost like everyone's a bunch of hypocrites. But I did enjoy this book as far as I read it. I don't think I finished it because it's just basically saying everyone's a bunch of hypocrites. And when you go to medical conferences, they're not sitting there doing breakthrough. No one cares about the patient, really. And I personally, again, medical doctors and law enforcement at a lower level, probably the most atrocious because they're in positions of authority. And then they just, pure narrative, they default to whatever their ideals are. Big problems with, obviously, with the judicial and the medical system. And it's all illegal. I mean, it's all illegal. Moving on, we have The Emotional Foundations of Personality by Mark Solms. The forward is by Mark Solms. The book is by Kenneth Davis and Jaak Panksepp. And so, again, this is when I first bridged, the laws of physics from motion to contain emotion, and very clearly, again, just look at the word, it's just motion with an E in front of it. But another book that I started off with good intentions, and then it's just kind of, it's observance, and it's just like, it's such little amount, there's such a little amount of analysis that it's just like, there's no reason for me to continue. So, as you can see, a lot of the biological books don't really do anything. And this is, again, still me as a student. But it's like, once you do enough of this mathematical proofing, I said there's no other words out there. You kind of run out of stuff. And so, oh my goodness, this one I definitely didn't finish. One of the worst books ever written. Definitively the worst book in human history. By our great colleague, Sean Carroll. The Particle at the End of the Universe. Now, this is interesting, because I have a bookmark in here. But unfortunately, I have to say, Sean Carroll's a decent writer. Is that guy going to prison? Yes, absolutely, 100,000,000%. Absolute total criminal. But of the science articulators that I have encountered, unfortunately, the most articulate one has been Sean Carroll. Fuck Sean Carroll. Hey, Sean, go to prison. But I did not finish this one. He had another book that I graded word for word, sent it to him, and I literally said in the email, not enough science for me to care. Didn't even have a tracking number on it. It's just another book out into the wild. So I did not finish this when I started this one, and for obvious reasons, there's 0 point for me to read about mathematics or physics to any extent at all. Because any application would be engineering, as identified today. But no, the boson is not the particle at the end of the universe. Let's roast Sean a little longer. How the Higgs boson leads us to the edge of the world, or edge of a new world. Right, Sean, what's the difference between the universe and a world? Many worlds, dude? Are we still doing that? Is it the Compton scale? Oh, not Compton. What are our types of quantum mechanics interpretations? I don't know. But Professor, how's modeling force as a particle going? Right? Mass is related to force with acceleration. And then we're going to have a boson. That's going to be the force-carrying particles. Oh, yeah, dude, that's definitely real. And obviously, you cannot model force as a particle. That is like the biggest axiomatic problem with that shit. And it's obviously inconsistent. But Sean Carroll goes to prison. So here's a book that I thought people probably thought or might have thought, I'm stuttering a lot today, that I might have liked, and I actually did not like whatsoever, was Christopher Hitchens, God Is Not Great. So, because there's a lot of the atheists and the theists, and it's just it's all just people trying to describe the world around them. And so I thought I would because seeing the debates or the stage sitting that Christopher Hitchens did was kind of entertaining. And so I thought he would be a good writer. I noped out of this book pretty quick. There is a bookmark in it about 100 pages in, but it's basically, again, just saying everyone's a bunch of hypocrites, which is true. But it's so were you, Christopher Hitchens. So were you. I think he died before he would have known who I was. Actually, I'm very confident he did die well before he would know who I was, but it's just this whole, it's God is not great. It's it's a historical oversimplification that nobody's even differentiated, that the Old and New Testament are about different freaking people. It clearly as clear as day is. But this book just, after you say, like I said, this was off-putting. I liked Christopher Hitchens as an individual, seeing him on YouTube, talking, interacting with people. As a writer, this was a drag from the get-go. So I started this one, got about 100 pages in, but even that 100 pages was not too interesting. So I made a I don't want to say mistake, because this was actually interesting. Here's probably the only book, at least in the initial readings, that's fictional. And this was just after I'm done with all of science, might as well do something. And so I read The Tourist, which is kind of like a time travel thing, which was kind of interesting. I remember reading it, thinking it was good and going, and then it just kind of stopped. And so I don't know what to say about this one. It kind of had my interest for a little bit, and then the book just ends. And so about 300 pages, and yeah, it just kind of stops. Yeah. So another book that I definitely read and finished that was interesting enough for me to finish was This Is Your Brain on Music by Daniel Levitin. So I did read this one, again, once I've axiomatized this first proof, and even the initial proofing, it was just like, there's no point for me to read STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. It's like I've derived it all, like actually. And so multiple times, you have to understand, you have to do this way more times than once to like solidify it. So yeah, this was a good one. Read the whole thing. And then this one I really enjoyed, A Lesson Before Dying. And so these ones where I'm pretty sure you would classify this as like a narrative historical nonfiction, where it's like, it's a fictional story, I think, but it's like the environment or the setting, the context is real life. So this is just about slavery. And you'll hear me a lot of times really specifically referencing that, you know, a slave at least knew they were a slave. They had the ability to connect with somebody else. Of course they're being beaten to death. Of course they're being whipped, tarred and feathered, treated lower than society. But amongst themselves, they know their lives are not worth less than anything. And that's articulated very poignantly in this book by Ernest J. Gaines. And I think it's well written. I thoroughly enjoyed the entirety of this one. But I consider, again, purely fiction versus... but then again, does pure fiction exist, right? Because you're still using intuition. When you're talking about time travel, you're still using some amount of intuition. So is there anything like, in the same way nothing is truly random, is nonfiction, or is fiction, does that really exist? Meaning you have to have some sort of intuition. It can not have happened. So yeah, I would say it exists, but it's based on a real thought. And those real thoughts come from real interactions. And so this was a poignant book about the slave times, and I thoroughly enjoyed this one. And so that is it for the books that I have, again, sitting around here. Like I said, there's probably about another 20 to 30 I've sent off to the different universities. But like I said, I think it just takes about, I would say, 30 to 50 books. Again, those are rough estimates, but it doesn't even need to be, you can just take, if you took any book about any subject, or you took any book about a subject you want to learn, 95, you could pick any book that's written and it'd be 95% complete as to what you want to learn. And so again, specifically for history, it's like you could have some political bent or religious bent or a cultural bent on some things, but you're still going to be talking about the same major world events, right? There's one World War II, one World War I for everybody. And so trying to branch off into more Eastern history, but personally I've read through most history, certainly all the major events that have occurred as a student, and now I'm on to the teaching aspect of my development. And so yeah, and so I think again, I don't know which one we'll pick, obviously you'll see which one I do, but it will either be Korea or Behind the Beautiful Forevers. So I just wanted to give you this quick little video before I started another book about my background in reading, the specific titles that I've read. And like I said, there's about another 20 or 30 more. Really interested in the history. Some of these science ones, like I said, I've read, but it was really truly after all of this independent derivation. And that was the biggest thing for me striking, is it's just like, okay, nobody respects me. My life's totally thrown away. People have destroyed my reputation. But objectively, when I sit down here and look at other people's behavior, whether it's Mark Cuban on YouTube or reading a historian, you can tell you're more developed. And so that was the biggest thing for me, because from saying I want to start doing mathematical research to the most profound physical realization, synchronizing my personal internal dialogue with everything around me, I'm not joking, it was less than an hour. And it was even less than that. It was like, I'm going to start doing research. And then it was like this inevitable realization. Right? And it's like I said, the most profound physical thing that effectively could occur. And so when I started emailing you guys, it wasn't like, I'm going to try to be a math dude today. It was like, holy shit. But then after that, and you go and read, and it's just like I said, you're just sitting there, and it's like you're missing something. It's like the world has passed you by, and then you go see people who are accomplished, who are recognized as accomplished, whether through monetary, celebrity, people know them. And you might say, oh, it doesn't matter about money, it doesn't matter about celebrity. Overall, society rewards novelty. It doesn't have to be good or bad. If it's just substantially different enough from what people understand or experience, it's going to get attention. And you hope that the quote-unquote good things get more attention than the bad things. But when you're sitting there and it's just like, I'm me, I'm not being arrogant, I'm not in front of a bunch of group of people trying to impress anybody, and I'm definitely more mature than these people. I definitely have more intuition than these people. And it's just like, what the fuck is occurring? And then you realize, holy shit, people have instinctually scapegoated me because of my level of awareness. And that's truly just what happened. And so by the time I was going to read books, I literally had already derived so much intuition, where it's just, I was at the point of just simply stating proofs. and proofs at the level that I'm demonstrating now. And so, because again, you have to do, and then speciality was I had to generate independently myself enough logic to produce a proof. You need a problem to solve. And so that's what we're doing now with sensorality. We've created this big logical structure, and we're going to find some thing that it isn't completely consistent, and sensorality is going to replace it, and it's going to be completely consistent within and throughout the entire ontology of the species. Fun stuff, and we're almost done with that. So thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one. I'm thinking I'm going to go with Korea, but you'll see it by the thumbnail. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.